The journal of peer-reviewed nonsense is not a real journal, but as you will see in this video, it doesn't need to be. There are plenty of real journals that are willing to publish nonsense. Would you like an example? How about a plagiarized chapter of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, updated for modern audiences, that was accepted for publication by Affiliate, Journal of Women and Social Work? More on that in a moment. I am Dr. John Padfield. I'm a business professor, and this is Business Reform, where I discuss issues at the intersection of business, technology, and society. Two of my most popular videos to date have been Corrupted Science, which discuss the thousands of peer-reviewed scientific articles that were retracted by their publisher because of peer review rings and other suspicious and/or unethical activity, and The Replication Crisis, which discussed the problem with the high percentage of scientific papers whose results could not be replicated by researchers from the Center for Open Science. In this video, I'm going to discuss another problem with the peer review process that was brought to light when a series of fraudulent research papers were peer-reviewed, accepted, and published in academic journals. The authors not only admitted their research papers were fake, but most of them were submitted under false names with false credentials from people claiming to work for institutions that don't even exist. The authors of these hoax papers then wrote a real article entitled Academic Grievance Studies and the Corruption of Scholarship, in which they explained how and why they wrote and submitted ridiculous papers to several well-known academic journals. Everything I'm about to share with you is contained in this article that was published in Aereo magazine on October 2nd, 2018. I have included a link to that article in the description of this video. Aereo magazine describes itself as, quote, a feisty little digital magazine with an international readership, providing commentary on politics, society, science, culture, and the arts. Its contributors include scientists, award-winning writers, human rights campaigners, and prominent academics. The magazine also states, quote, amid the current atmosphere of partisanship and hysteria, we provide a haven for calm, reasonable voices from both left and right. Our writers are unafraid to tackle controversial issues, to go against status quo orthodoxy, and to toss sacred cows onto the barbecue and turn them into brisket. But they also refrain from inflammatory clickbait, personal vendettas, hyperbole, and scaremongering. Our aim is not to posture, but to persuade. I had never heard of Aereo magazine prior to researching this video, but when I discovered them, I felt an instant kinship to them, because their magazine has the same philosophy I try to promote on this channel. Who were these hoaxers? The authors that wrote a series of fake research papers were all academics. Specifically, they were James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and Peter Bogason. In their article about the corruption of scholarship, they described themselves as liberals, but they knew they would be accused of being racist, sexist, bigoted, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, privileged, far right-wing bullies on the side of hate. These three academics wrote a series of 20 fraudulent articles and submitted them to well-known academic journals. They stressed none of the journals were pay-to-play journals that are often run by publishers who will publish nearly anything if the author is willing to pay upwards of $1,200 in publication fees. And when I say pay-to-play journals will publish nearly anything, I'm not exaggerating. In 2017, the peer-reviewed pay-to-play journal Cogent Social Sciences published a fake research paper entitled The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. The abstract of this article claimed, quote, the conceptual penis is better understood not as an anatomical organ, but as a social construct isomorphic to performative toxic masculinity. The article went on to claim that nowhere are the consequences of the conceptual penis more problematic than concerning the issue of climate change. I will say it one more time. That was a peer-reviewed, pay-to-play journal that published that gibberish. But the 20 farcical research articles written by these three authors were not sent to pay-to-play journals. They were sent to well-known leading cultural studies journals. All 20 of the papers were based on what the authors described as, quote, something absurd or deeply unethical or both. Of the 20 articles submitted, 6 were rejected for not meeting academic standards, 7 were still pending a decision, and 7 had been accepted. The difference between accepted and published was purely a matter of time. 4 of the articles had already been published before the 3 authors came forward and admitted these 20 papers were all a hoax. Had the authors waited to admit that it was all a hoax, the 3 accepted papers would have been published, and most likely a couple of the 7 papers that were still under review would have also been published. In addition to having 7 of their papers accepted, the authors received invitations from 4 journals to become peer reviewers on other papers. For ethical reasons, the authors declined all of these invitations. But keep in mind, most of these papers were submitted under false names with false credentials. The journals did not even bother checking if the authors were real people before not only accepting their papers, but offering to let the hoaxers become peer reviewers themselves. You might be wondering, why did the 3 authors come forward at the time they did and admit it was a hoax, rather than waiting for the remaining 7 articles to be decided whether they were rejected or accepted? The reason the authors came forward when they did was a direct result of the 4th article they succeeded in getting published. It was so outlandish and over the top that the Wall Street Journal began its own investigation of how such utter garbage made it past the peer review process. Let's quickly examine just 5 of the articles these 3 authors managed to get through the peer review process. The first published paper was on the topic of fat bodybuilding, which was published in the peer-reviewed journal Fat Studies, and subsequently retracted after the authors admitted the entire article was fake. The thesis of the article was that, quote, "It is only oppressive cultural norms which make society regard the building of muscle rather than fat admirable, and that bodybuilding and activism on behalf of the fat could be benefited by including fat bodies displayed in non-competitive ways." The purpose of this article was to see if journals would accept arguments which are ludicrous and positively dangerous to health if they support cultural constructive arguments around body positivity and fat phobia. The second article the trio succeeded in getting published was entitled, quote, "Going in through the back door, challenging straight male homohysteria and transphobia through receptive penetrative sex toy use." This article, published in the journal Sexuality and Culture, was submitted under a false name from someone who claimed to work at the Portland Ungendering Research Initiative, which is a fictitious organization. The purpose of this paper was to see if journals will accept ludicrous arguments if they support unfalsifiable claims that common and harmless sexual choices made by straight men are actually homophobic, transphobic, and anti-feminist. The third fake article to be published was entitled An Ethnography of Restaurant Masculinity, Themes of Objectification, Sexual Conquest, Male Control, and Masculine Toughness in a Sexually Objectifying Restaurant, which was published in the peer-reviewed journal Sex Roles. In this paper, the author claimed to have spent 2 years watching men inside a Hooters restaurant to try and understand why heterosexual men are attracted to female servers. The data reported was clearly nonsense, and the conclusions drawn were not supported by the extremely shoddy research, even if the research had been real. The purpose of this paper was to see if journals will publish papers that, quote, "seek to problematize heterosexual men's attraction to women and accept very shoddy research methodologies and ideologically motivated interpretations of the data." The fourth paper to get published was not only accepted and published, it was given special recognition for excellence from the journal Gender, Place, and Culture. The journal honored this article as one of the 12 leading pieces in feminist geography as part of the journal's 25th anniversary celebration. This was also the article that launched the Wall Street Journal's investigation into how such utter nonsense was getting published in peer-reviewed academic journals. And what was that research that was honored as one of the 12 best articles in feminist geography? The article was entitled Human Reactions to Rape Culture and Queer Performativity at Urban Dog Parks in Portland, Oregon, and it was published in the peer-reviewed journal Gender, Place, and Culture. In this paper, the author claimed to have, quote, tactfully inspected the genitals of nearly 10,000 dogs while interrogating owners about their sexuality. The author also claims to have witnessed an average of 1 dog rape per hour at the dog park. The thesis of this paper is that dog parks are rape-condoning spaces and there is systematic oppression against oppressed dogs through which human attitudes to both problems can be measured. The purpose of the article was to see if journals will accept arguments which should be clearly ludicrous and unethical as long as they provide a way to perpetuate notions of toxic masculinity, heteronormativity, and implicit bias. One of the peer reviewers of this paper praised it, saying, quote, "The fieldwork executed contributes immensely to the paper's contribution as an innovative and valuable piece of scholarship that will engage readers from across a broad cross-section of disciplines." And finally, we get back to Hitler being peer-reviewed and accepted. The paper entitled "Our Struggle is My Struggle: Solidarity Feminism as an Intersectional Reply to Neoliberal and Choice Feminism" was accepted by Affiliate, Journal of Women in Social Work, but because the authors came forward and admitted the paper was a hoax, this paper was never actually published. The paper was submitted in the names of Maria Gonzalez and Lisa A. Jones from the Feminist Activist Collective for Truth, which are all fictional. However, 2/3 of this paper was plagiarized from Chapter 12, Volume 1 of Adolf Hitler's book Mein Kampf. The authors just updated Hitler's writing with what they called, quote, "fashionable buzzwords" to update the writing for a modern audience. In the article that the 3 academics wrote explaining why they created these 20 articles and submitted them to see if they could get them through the peer review process, the authors expressed their growing concern about how what's going on in the universities today is working its way into society in general. They describe themselves as liberal. They are not against these topics, but they want to ensure that there is academic rigor in the actual studies that are going on and what's being reported in academic journals. Their experiment was purely to demonstrate that there is not enough academic rigor in the peer review process. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and sharing it with a friend, and thank you for watching.